Kristen Cockey is a licensed clinical social worker who also happens to be a parent to 2 boys with life-threatening food allergies, as well as live with food allergies herself. Kristen's dozen years of clinical experience includes therapy with clients of all ages. She has provided individual, family, couples, and group counseling in both private and school settings. Additionally, Kristen has presented and written on the topics of coping with anxiety and resolving conflict in relationships as it relates to living with life-threatening food allergies. She has penned 3 books. Her most recent, Growing Up Ben, is written in the form of a mother's letters to her son and follows a family's developmental process through anxiety and restricted living to autonomy and intentional living. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to you and the rest of FAIR for the invitation to be here today. I'm greatly excited about this opportunity. This really does blend 2 of my passions in terms of personal and professional life here. So what I hope to achieve today, my goal in this webinar, is to provide a framework for maintaining healthy relationships while navigating life with severe food allergies. Now, the first thing I want to do is just talk about what are foundational components of a healthy relationship to begin with. Then once we understand that within each of these components, talking about essential conversations to have regarding a person's food allergy within that healthy relationship. So conversations that can increase connection and decrease conflict. And while a lot of the webinar will focus on adult relationships, I definitely want to highlight special challenges that will pertain to teens and young adults. So why should we care? Well, if you're listening in, I realize I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I think it bears repeating that both secure relationships and avoiding allergens are essential and needed for survival. Without secure relationships, our well-being decreases. And when we have secure relationships, our well-being increases. There is lots of compelling evidence that loving relationships and sound connections are essential to human survival. It goes back all the way to 1760. It's the first time there were observations recorded where children in foundling homes would regularly, quote, die from sadness. In the 1940s, that phrase, failure to thrive, was coined. Also in the 40s to 50s, there were lots of experiments that really highlighted the importance of social connection. Bowlby concluded that loving contact is as important as physical nutrition. And then there's the famous Harry Harlow's monkey love experiments, which really drew attention to the power of contact comfort for keeping normal development on track. There's lots of current studies that repeatedly prove married women, men and women, generally live longer than their single peers, and also evidence that when we are in emotional isolation or have conflict in our relationships, we're at risk for things like high blood pressure, increased stress hormones, heart attack. It really is bad for our health. Brain imaging studies also show that rejection, isolation trigger the same circuits in the part of the brain as physical pain. That this being alone, not having sound connection really does hurt. Sound connection is essential as oxygen or water. We need healthy relationships. And when we have a long-term health condition, such as a food allergy, that can be a challenge because food allergies have their own stress upon a relationship. So our food allergy safety definitely matters. Dr. Wood in the October webinar would tell us that most cases of anaphylaxis are accidental exposures that occur away from home, and most fatal incidents correlate with failure to treat promptly. So we know that our allergy action plan is essential for safety. The other thing is that in maintaining our safety and living a life with allergies, it's bound to bring up certain stresses because we have to avoid food, and food is a huge part of life. So we'll have stresses physically, socially, and psychologically. Physically, there's those reactions, which are awful. There's also the physical rigors and time that must be considered as far as maintaining allergy safety. Socially, there's stress when we feel excluded, those times when we feel misunderstood before we have the opportunity to educate and reframe perceptions. And then psychologically, there's the stress of fear. If you've had a reaction yourself or a loved one has, there's fear, maybe even trauma that occurs as a result from that. There's also grief upon diagnosis of giving up that hope of being able to live that normal life eating out as we would want. So knowing that healthy connections are essential, but that in having a food allergy, we have to factor in these perpetual areas of stress. How do we secure that win-win? How do we be safe and sound? Well, I'd like to propose an equation for success, and that involves understanding what a strong foundation of a relationship begins with, and then adding essential conversations involving our food allergies. I think with that in mind, we can achieve a place where we feel safe and sound. So before going on, I want to give credit where credit is due. I'm going to talk a lot about what is that foundation, characteristics of a healthy relationship, and I'm borrowing the ideas from Dr. Claudia Black. It's out of her book, Changing Course, and while this book actually isn't about relationships or couples therapy or anything, I find that I cite her characteristics from this book very often, whether I'm working with couples or high schoolers, because her approach is very straightforward, comprehensive, it's very clear and concise. And I'm going to talk about these because I do believe we need a framework for a reliable pattern of transformation. So here we are, the characteristics of a strong foundation that we're going to talk about. There's 10 that Dr. Claudia Black proposes, and they're not in any specific order, yet as we go through these, I think you'll find that one very much influences another. They're very intertwined. And maybe, perhaps, even if you happen to hear that song, Safe and Sound by Capital Cities on the radio, maybe this visual will come to mind, and if there was any takeaway from today's webinar, it might remind you of certain things to maybe implement. So we're going to start with that foundation of respect. Respect is an attitude for which courtesy is an expression. I accept the unique person you are. It's honoring another's space and things they value, even if we don't understand it. This is not, you're being paranoid, or, ugh, this is so high maintenance. Now, respect, I think, involves actions, and we'll get to different actions when we talk about trust in a little bit. But I think another huge component of respect is really communication. So when it comes to communication, there is a couples therapist, Gottman, who would propose that it's not conflict that leads to strained relationships. It's really how we fight. And he identifies what he calls the 4 horsemen in communication, and those are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and the cold shoulder. All of these are things which increase conflict and decrease connection. So criticism is different than a complaint. Criticism would be more global and often attacks the person's character, while a complaint addresses a specific action. So for example, a complaint might sound like, I'm angry you didn't text me back, I'm annoyed this conversation was forgotten, versus a criticism, which is, why are you so forgetful? I hate that I have to do everything. What's wrong with you? You never listen to anything I tell you. Again, these are things that are not a show of respect. They're going to increase conflict and decrease our connection. Then there's contempt. And Gottman would say this is the worst of the 4 horsemen. It conveys disgust, and it's fueled by a long simmering negative thoughts about another person. Sounds awful, right? But wait till I talk a little bit about what that entails. Things like sarcasm, name-calling, eye-rolling, sneering, hostile humor are all forms of contempt. And now, if we're honest, how often do we fall into such patterns within our relationships? So be on the lookout for that. There's the aspect of defensiveness, and that's that blame game that we tend to be very good at. And then the cold shoulder, when we've had enough and we just back away. So really thinking about how we manage our communication with another person, how we use impeccable speech even. So here's some essential respectful conversations. These are for if we have a food allergy or for our partners, just good rules to live by. Be patient, be kind, be direct. No minimizing, undermining, or using a condescending tone. One of my least favorite examples is when you're trying to plead a case with someone and they say, oh God, that's what they start with. Honor reasonable requests and routines for safety. Remember, that goes back to when we respect someone, we honor a person's space. When bothered, get clarity. All right, so communication can either be the glue or the kerosene in the relationship. And very often when it turns into the kerosene is when we don't have clarity between the message and the meta message. So here's an example. A message is what is said. The meta is what is heard. I think back to this time when my little guy, I'm making food from scratch because, of course, most food allergy cooking is done from scratch and it takes excessive time. And he walks in and his message was, "What smells?" Now, what I heard, the meta in that was, "Your cooking sucks, Mom. Nona does it better, and I hate living here." Now, that wasn't at all what he truly said. But if I reacted to the meta, little guy suddenly feels like I threw the first punch. Whereas when I interpret his message in a meta message, I'm feeling like he threw the first punch. So you can see where when we don't have clarity in our communication, we don't have respectful communication, things can lead to conflict. All right, so while most characteristics that I'm going to cover really should ideally be reciprocal, there's a special segment of respect here that I feel needs to be highlighted when it comes to partners. So some respectful tips for partners here. Please don't treat accommodations like a burden. It makes your partner feel like you're rejecting a part of them. There's just no way not to take it personally. So comments about reading labels, that it's a pain, yeah, that's true. But you have to avoid certain foods, yeah, that's a bummer, I get that. Cost, yep, most food allergic friendly foods are more expensive, get that, that's pain. But you know what, all those comments are below the belt. Consider them below the belt. It's not a choice. This is about safety. So the compromise here really does rest on your shoulders. It's part of the package of this relationship. So let's just transpose this type of thinking onto another medical condition, such as diabetes. Imagine if a response was, "Do you really need to check your blood sugar? Kind of dampens the evening. Gosh, your diabetes is so inconvenient." Right? We'd never think of doing that. That would be ridiculous. But the sad truth is there are medical conditions and even certain allergies that are seen as more legit than others. So be respectful with your partner if they have a food allergy. Here's one more challenge I'm going to pose to you. If you're the partner in a relationship of your loved one having a food allergy, when family or friends make negative comments about your partner and their allergy, I'm going to challenge you to take it as your duty to take a stand. After all, blood is thicker than water. Now, when I say take a stand, I don't mean wound the relationship. I mean take an opportunity to educate. Reframe this misperception of picky or high maintenance to this is a person taking essential steps for safety. So I do want to make this clear because we have to choose our battles, and I don't want us going to battle over everything. And sometimes a nice way to think about when do we take a stand versus when do we just really need to let it go. And this goes for food allergies or any problem in life, really. There's only two times really when we have to take a stand, and that's when there's a safety issue or a violation of rights. So when it comes to safety with food allergy, that's when we need to have precautions, and if that's being limited for some reason, if there's an obstacle there, we need to take a stand against that. And then the other one would be that disrespect. And when I say that, I mean blatant disrespect, that character assassination. Going back to that idea of criticism versus a true complaint, those would be times to take a stand. Be assertive. Use it as an opportunity to educate or refrain. Everything else in life, it's really not our place to take a stand. And this is where that aspect of forgiveness that we'll talk about later will come in. I hope that clarifies a little bit about when to choose a battle. So the next foundation is that of honesty. And this is open, direct communication, the ability to speak for yourself and the ability to listen. This is feeling free to be real and to share your thoughts and feelings and doings without fear of major catastrophe. It involves being authentic and transparent. It's allowing your partner to see you. So some things about when we are being honest in our conversations, no matter what age we are, be forthcoming early on. Now, this doesn't mean upon introduction, "Hi, I'm Kristen, I have a peanut allergy," but at least consider having this conversation before the potential of kissing becomes a reality. Be real, don't be dramatic. Say what you mean and mean what you say. No asking, no getting. I'll go back and say that a few more times because I do think that's important. So maybe it comes down to something like, "Hey, I fear you're going to think I'm being high maintenance, but it is important for you to be aware that I actually have a serious food allergy to peanuts. And there's certain steps that I'll take when eating away from home so that I don't have a reaction. And you can help by not eating peanut products a few hours before we hang out. So keep that in mind, that those conversations can often feel really awkward, but that awkwardness is temporary and very minor compared to what could happen if we don't have that conversation. Some other things about honest conversations. No matter how long or how well you think you know each other, your partner cannot read your mind. All right, I forget this one. Even I forget this one. So very often I'll find myself packing the lunches for the kids and thinking, God, I really wish my husband would do part of this too. And I can think really, really hard about it. I can wish all I want, but really I need to ask. And I can't get mad at him for not reading my mind because that's not going to be possible. No asking, no getting. Then finally, honesty doesn't mean you have to say everything that comes to your mind. Those filters, sometimes those thoughts we think in our head, but we don't actually say them out loud, those are good things. Keep in mind respect, like we talked about before, and using impeccable speech. Now, honest conversations, those are going to be tricky for adolescents and young adults because just where they're at developmentally in life, adolescents, their brains are in these incredible state of change for the most normal and healthy of teenagers. Their strong emotions, they respond and deal with them by that fight or flight reaction. Teen brains have an underdeveloped sense of empathy. They understand risk, but they value rewards more. And they're prone to emotional misreads, so they often see fear and concern as anger. And those factors really muddy the water when it comes to their ability to know when to have that honest conversation. There was a 2010 study done at Tufts that really did highlight how this plays out with a food allergy. And what it found was that for teens, their desire may often trump safety, which is crazy, right? Because the physical consequences are way more dangerous than that stigma or that temporary awkwardness. But it happens. Teen brains understand risk but value rewards more. So if you're a teen, here are some things that I often say to maybe help having these honest conversations feel a little less muddy. The first is use gender stereotypes to your favor. Now, this may be the only time in my life I actually say that, but know that if you're a male and you have a food allergy, it's often thought stereotypically that males will plan the date. So plan a place that's safe for you. Use that to your advantage. Females, if you have that food allergy, know that stereotypically we're supposed to be picky when we eat. So use that to your advantage. Know that it might even be expected. Also know that your partner doesn't want to hurt you. They really don't. And also that there is hope because as the relationship grows, the insecurity decreases and these conversations become easier. It does become easier to ask for necessary accommodations. So the next foundation for a healthy relationship is having realistic expectations. This is being reasonable about what we can offer another and what they can offer us. It's knowing that I am responsible for many of my needs and that the combination of friends, family, and partner can help me meet varying interpersonal needs. It is not thinking that my partner will be available and responsible for all of my needs. Now, this is the part where we talk about boundaries, and boundaries are healthy to have in a relationship. That's an understanding of where do I end and they begin. So when it comes to food allergies, there's going to have to be essential conversations about limitations of environments and the realities of cost, going back to the fact that, I do need to buy that brand because it's safe. And I know it's more expensive, but that is the realistic expectation. The other one is certain environments might be tricky. They might take more planning, or they might be off limits depending on the severity of your allergy, and that's just a realistic expectation. An example here is back in, my husband and I met in college, and back when we were dating, going out to eat at Yanjing was our favorite thing to do on Sunday nights for dinner. And then the summer I was diagnosed with a peanut allergy. Well, there was no more Chinese outings like that. And so, we had to be realistic about what that meant. Realistic that I couldn't really go with anymore and feel comfortable, and that it wasn't realistic for me to ban that for him too, that it was okay for him to go with people that he could go with, and we could go and do something different instead. which leads into that next part here. Wanting your partner to be your best friend does not mean they should be your only friend. Nurture other relationships in your life. Ask for and allow time with others to meet needs that can't be met with each other. Especially if we have food allergies, we need to engage in others for coping. We need a network, not just a partner to lean on. So that's where things like support groups, online forums, webinar, books, maybe even counseling become really helpful. Check out other things too, like learning about web discounts. You know, Amazon's subscribe and save or buying rice milk in bulk. Explore any way to ease the burden, because we know that food allergies add an element of stress to relationships. The next is the foundation of trust. That's where I feel safe psychologically and physically with you. This develops over time and if we allow opportunities. This does not develop if someone is inconsistent, unpredictable, or does not follow through with their intentions. Now this one goes for both parties, and especially in this element of trust. You know, before I was picking on the partner, here I'm going to pick on us a little bit and really hopefully bring to light an important aspect of trust for us to consider within our healthy relationship if we have a food allergy. First of all, consider if any of your behaviors or beliefs inhibit trust. You know, like said in the definition, trust develops if we allow opportunities. So if we're playing that martyr, where we're trying to do it all, we're not really allowing opportunities for trust to build. We're also not really showing respect for our partner as a capable person. Those are important aspects of a healthy relationship. Trust can't be thought of as all or nothing. I like to think of it as a continuum between 0 and 100%, so that in knowing that we need to allow room in the middle for our partner to kind of have a rough draft and make edits, but not too much room that catastrophic mistakes happen. We really do need to separate small infractions from major violations, because we're all going to fail each other, even in a healthy relationship. So here's an example. I flew in from Chicago yesterday, and when I think of that continuum of trust, how much trust do I have in my husband to properly be supervising and caring for and parenting our children? Tons, absolutely. How much trust do I have if I got to bed on time last night? Maybe not as much. But is that a safety violation? Is that a violation of my rights? No, that's not a time to choose to go to battle. Those are things I need to let go. The other thing is consider if there's a performance deficit, meaning he's not doing it or she's not doing it, or a skill deficit. If it's a skill deficit, if a partner's lacking in knowledge or understanding, this is where we can help build that education. You know, maybe read with them up on a topic, attend a support group meeting, ask them to come to a food allergy conference with you. And also keep in mind that sometimes when it comes to trust, division of labor really comes into play in a relationship. So to be quite honest, within our household, I probably do the majority of the food allergy research, education. My husband is absolutely happy to learn and implement. And by the same token, I'm very happy to have him take the lead when it comes to things like our taxes or even programming the DVR. And happy to comply when it comes to implementing these things, but we can't all be 100% at everything. Division of labor falls into one of those realistic expectations. One other thought. When we think of that, real definition of love, know that love always trusts, and love does protect. So keep that in mind. Finally, any abuse, be it verbal, emotional, physical, sexual, absolutely nullifies trust. It's a deal breaker and never part of a healthy relationship. Now we move on to autonomy. And this is where each of us takes responsibility to evolve into the best version of ourselves. We're clear about our own needs, being respectful of the limits and boundaries of others as well. This is not selfishness, like I'm entitled to do what I please, nor is it thinking and feeling the same way as our partner, where we collapse into one schmoopy being. It's being capable. It's being a capable individual who is capable of celebrating their partner's individuality. This is really responsible self-care. All right, so here we're going to focus a little bit on if you have a food allergy, conversations maybe to be having with yourself. it is important to develop a sense of self separate from your food allergy. Again, it's responsible. Self-care is responsible. It's not being selfish. So those areas of self-care, physically, how do we eat? How do we sleep? How do we move? Socially, are we connected to a network of people to help us? Emotionally, I'm going to come back to that. Intellectually, how are we feeding our brain? Creatively, how do we play? And then that spiritual sense, and that doesn't have to be religious, but just knowing that there's a bigger thing here. There's a snowstorm coming into DC and nobody pressed go to make that happen. So going back to the emotional aspect of self-care, from my own personal experience, as well as the families that I work with clinically, there's a lot of anxiety surrounding managing or living life with a food allergy. And it absolutely makes sense where that comes from, because if you've had an anaphylactic reaction, or if you've witnessed a loved one having a reaction, it's terrifying, traumatic even. But we can't stay stuck in that state. We need to be responsible to take those steps to heal and move beyond it. Dismissal of that dysfunction in our lives doesn't mean we're well. And it really does limit ourselves from being our best self psychologically. When we are stuck in that anxious, hypervigilant state, we're in a brain-body state that is limited from being logical. There's obstacles to what we see, how we move, how we experience the world. It puts limits on our creativity, our ability to learn, and our ability to love. So if we know that it's there, we need to address it. And this is an inside job. It's really where we do need to seek the help of clinicians who can help us with matters of the heart from the inside. The other thing is really try to learn about your own gifts and with whom and how do you want to share them with the world. Think about, what am I doing when I feel most alive? Get to know that. And then if it comes to your partner not being able to be autonomous, sometimes a person's inability to take responsibility for themselves is not directly correlated with their love for us. It could be symptomatic of deeper personal issues, such as unresolved trauma, addiction. Those are things that always limit a person's ability to self-care. So that old phrase of, well, if they really love me, it doesn't always apply. Now we're at the foundation of shared power. And this is where both people are able to take initiative, to take initiative and to respond. Here there's mutual give and take. This is not about control. It's not about ownership or the need to be right. Are you starting to see how much overlap and how much interconnection there is between these characteristics of healthy relationships? How connected shared power is to autonomy, is to respect, is to trust. All right, so when we're thinking about essential conversations to have, thinking about that notion of shared power, if we're a person with food allergy, be aware of fear-based stances. So that is to say, when we seek to ease our anxiety by desperately imposing control over someone else or over our environment, know that it never leads to freedom. That sense of control is really giving us a false sense of security, because what the root of it is anxiety, like we talked about before. We need to manage it. We need to allow room for other people to be part of our lives in a shared way. Here's some motivation too. Partners will resent being managed, treated as though incompetent, but also for yourself, because that unequal distribution of responsibility can lead to feelings of resentment. Again, neither of those are parts of healthy relationships. So pull on each other's strengths, assign tasks, division of labor, realistic expectations. This is what shared power is about. So here we are, another foundation, that of tenderness, and this is that affection, both physical and emotional. And for adolescents, one thing I'd like to point out is here we are 7 characteristics in, and finally talking about affection. So I'd just like to highlight, because a lot of the high schoolers I work with tend to think that intimacy is the only aspect of a relationship, and as I hope I've made clear, there's lots of other components to think about beyond the physical. So here are some conversations to have with regard to tenderness, intimacy. First of all, knowing what's the real versus perceived risks of physical intimacy if you have a food allergy. Now, I think we can all agree there are real risks to physical intimacy, regardless if you have a food allergy or not. And so, but above and beyond, if you have a food allergy, there's extra safety that we do need to keep in mind. There was the famous kissing study done in 2006, where subjects with peanut and tree nut allergies, 5.3% of them were found to have reactions, even after hours of the partner having eaten their allergic food. So the research from that study, it does suggest that there's a need to wait several hours and ingesting a peanut-free meal because it's shown to be more effective than toothbrushing and gum chewing alone. So here again, it draws back to those honest conversations where we need to be able to say, you know, if you want to be with me later, don't be with peanuts now. A good rule of thumb, if that feels too awkward, is to maybe think if you can't talk about it, maybe you shouldn't be doing it. Knowing that that fear of the awkward conversation, it is temporary awkwardness versus, you know, potentially catastrophic consequences. And if we're worried about the awkward conversation, think about the awkward reaction. There's nothing that's less attractive than the hives that protrude and the snot that happens and the wheezing. None of that's good. So have that conversation. So here's some tips for partners. Remember that don't underestimate the power of emotional turn-ons, knowing that intimacy is not just achieved physically. So I think probably a lot of women out there would agree that, you know, when the man does things, let's see, uninstigated, meaning we don't have to nag or ask for them, that there's a real turn-on involved in that, in just doing housework or running an errand. Also, keep in mind that the quality of tenderness is likely to increase in response to increases in quality of the other characteristics. So when there's things like honest communication, when there is respect, when there is trust, it really enhances how we feel about being with another person, how we feel about being with our partner. All of these are important components. We'll talk a little more about the idea of that in the aspect of long-term commitment. So here we are, foundation of time. And this is really where we take moments to be in the relationship, creating a shared experience. And this involves prioritizing and balance. So going back to that idea of balance, I kind of see it as if we have a food allergy, or food allergy is part of a relationship, that we want to have a balance between food-centered ways that we spend time together and person-centered ways that we spend time together. So I'll start with food-centered ways. Know that cooking is a labor of love. You'd be surprised at how much fun it might be to cook together, or how that can even be kind of an emotional or intimate activity together. So find those special food allergy recipes and try new ones together, and then that can be the date itself. Other ways to spend food-centered time together is attend a seminar, listen to a webinar or documentary together. Research and play with different restaurant apps that are out there to make dining out easier. And know that there are dating by diet websites out there. There are sites that actually match restricted eaters with other restricted eaters. And you know, when you think about the fact that it's thought 1/3 of marriages begin with online dating, that, you know, why not? These are free, and they're ways to meet others like that might be like yourself. Why feel alone? All right, so now we want to balance, though, with that person-centered time in our relationships. One thing is to be aware of making your food allergy the third wheel in your relationship. We have to, we want to be with that person. Just like, you know, our partner wants a relationship. Your partner wants a relationship with you. And just like Harry Harlow's monkey love stories, relationships thrive, not on safety alone, but on that secure connection. So make time for meaningful conversations. Plan activities that don't have to involve food. Sometimes my favorite dates have been ones where there's been a new shared experience, such as kayaking or rock wall climbing. So keep that balance between the food and the person. Foundation of long-term commitment. So this is making a commitment to work on our relationship. This is trusting that when there are problems in the relationship, we'll work them out. This is not breaking it off the minute things get hard, nor is it staying in the relationship when it means that being abused or giving up our integrity happens as part of the process. So essential conversations about commitment. First of all, know that even in most healthy relationships, we sign up for perpetual problems. There's no perfect relationship. Maybe he's an extrovert and she's an introvert. Maybe he snores. Maybe she's an impulse shopper. I hear that even Brad Pitt's a nail biter. There is no perfect relationship. One of the things that attracted me most to my husband when I first met him was his sense of humor, and that's the very aspect of him that sometimes I can't stand the most when we're in the middle of conflict, when he cracks that joke. And so just know that that's normal, even in a healthy relationship. Now, here's some important aspects for teens and commitment. As a teen or young adult, commitment also involves making time for all of your other relationships. Remember that realistic expectations don't morph into one person. Don't isolate with just the person you're dating. Have a balance with all of your relationships. And maybe also consider that the level of intimacy in a relationship should ideally correlate with level of commitment. Just some things to keep in mind. So here we are, that foundation of forgiveness. I think this one can be really hard. These are some of my favorite quotes about forgiveness, though. Forgiveness is really about remembering and letting go. Notice I didn't say forgive and forget, because that's near impossible. But forgiveness it's stated authentically, and this is really a choice for you. It's different than reestablishing trust and respect, or even the relationship. It also doesn't mean selling your heart or your integrity to have peace. It doesn't mean you say sorry for everything, but when it's called upon, being able to forgive. One of my favorite quotes, forgiveness means giving up all hope for a better past. The other one idea is you can waste a lot of time and energy being angry. And at some point, it doesn't matter who is right and who is wrong. At some point, being angry is just another bad habit, like smoking, and you keep poisoning yourself without thinking about it. Another thought is that holding a grudge is like letting someone live rent-free in your head. This is where it's important to have boundaries when we talk about forgiveness. Going back to the idea of when we need to let go versus going to battle, that most things in life, if it's not a safety issue or a major violation of rights, we do need to let go, and we need to practice forgiveness. So some essential things to think about for forgiveness is that it's not like issuing a certificate. You have to keep forgiving until it takes, again and again and again. That idea of giving second chances for small violations, because we're all going to mess up. And even in healthy relationships, there's times we're going to fail each other. There's times we're going to hurt each other. And that's why forgiveness is so essential. You have permission to forgive yourself too. Sometimes I think that might be one of the hardest ones, because we want to be that perfect partner. We want to be that perfect parent. And there really isn't such a thing. So forgive yourself and just be where you're at. We're all learning how to do this thing called life. How do we be a little bit kinder and more open-minded along the way? So one thought I really want to leave with that I think is very important is don't confuse struggles over food allergies with fundamental problems in the relationship. If you're having these essential conversations that we went over and it's still not working, maybe it's not really about the food allergy after all. Maybe that's more symptomatic of a deeper fundamental problem in the relationship. It is possible to love someone but not have the characteristics to be in a healthy, loving relationship. So there's a link here that you can reference at a later time, but especially for teens and young adults, it's a video series from Anaphylaxis Canada, and it involves a couple. The girl featured in the video has a food allergy, and she talks along with her boyfriend about talking about the food allergy and going through those essential conversations, building trust, building respect, realistic expectations. And it's just a really nice summary, I think, for teens and young adults to have sort of just a blueprint of what that might look and sound like in real life. some other things for you, other resources. Here again is Claudia Black's book. It guides readers from healing from chaos of addiction and abandonment in relationships. And that's where there's a chapter in there where I take her characteristics of healthy relationships from. Hold Me Tight is by Dr. Sue Johnson. She is an emotionally focused therapist, EFT. And her approach to couples therapy is founded upon the idea that we depend on sound attachments for survival. So this book, she talks about 7 different conversations to have, and it goes through and actually gives some kind of homework for couples to do to achieve that end. And then finally, 10 best ever anxiety management techniques. Margaret Wernberg's book offers readers some great anxiety defeating tips. And we know that food allergies can be scary, so why not look for help to better equip us?
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Kristen. So we've gotten a few questions in that have come in during the talk. That was a great talk, I think, for me as well to hear. I'll go through a couple of questions that we've gotten. We've gotten some other ones that are coming in right now. So feel free to keep sending those in through the questions box in the interface. The first question was from a mom with a teen daughter who's just starting to date, and she has multiple allergies, and she's just worried about the whole kissing issue. Mm-hmm. So the question was part of the biology behind it, but then also just the emotional aspect and how to talk to your partner about doing that a little bit more in detail. I can talk about the biology piece first. There was a study done in 2006 by Scott Sisher and some other folks that looked at various methods after someone ate peanut protein, ate peanuts, how long was the protein still in their saliva after they ate that, and what methods would help get rid of that. And they looked at brushing teeth and waiting, rinsing and brushing teeth, rinsing only, just waiting, eating other meals afterwards. What they found is all those really did a good job of reducing the amount of peanut protein in the mouth, but the only two they felt comfortable enough that it was reduced enough to was for either waiting several hours or eating a meal that did not contain the protein. So either waiting or eating a different meal or a combination of both. Again, that was only for peanut protein, so it didn't look at some of the other proteins that were in there. I believe that's the only study that I've seen that's out there about that. This, I would say to use caution, obviously, and to try to wait. And again, one of the things recommended is to eat a different meal. But I'll let Kristen talk a little bit about the emotional side of that and how the communication is important.
Sure, and I'm guessing that there's probably a two-tiered emotional component. The emotional component for the teenage girl and having that conversation with her boyfriend, but also the emotional component for mom and having to allow that space for her daughter to have that conversation with her boyfriend. So first, for the teen, going back to what I was saying before is that I get it. It's hard to assert yourself as an adolescent. We fear being different. We fear that we're going to be rejected. So remind yourself that your boyfriend doesn't want to hurt you. That would feel awful for him. Also remember that even though that conversation might feel awkward, it's temporary. It will wear off very quickly versus the potential allergic reaction is not so temporary. So really trying to weigh the cost versus the risk there, the risk versus the safety there. I would also encourage you to use humor with your boyfriend. If it's hard to be really serious and you don't want to scare him, use a little bit of humor in it, and just find your own voice and your way of saying that, like the example I gave, if you want to be with me later, you can't be with peanuts now. You can find a gentle way to say it and allow space for if he has further questions thereafter. This is your right to assert because it is a safety issue, so it's something you do need to do. And I think really question if you're having a hard time having that conversation, what might that mean? What does that mean in regard to the relationship in terms of how much trust you feel, how much safety you feel around your boyfriend? It's going to feel awkward, but if it feels impossible, really question what is that saying about the relationship. Now, when it comes to that second tier of mom allowing space for the daughter to have that conversation, I feel for moms it can be terrifying but that's where we have to allow that trust on a continuum and allow enough space for our kids to have the opportunity to make a rough draft, and that there's going to be missteps along the way. They might have some errors and revisions that they need to make in their rough draft, but it is respectful and it is essential for them to build that trust with us, to have that space to do that. So not enough space where we're completely hands-off and, hey, do whatever you want. Yeah, see you tomorrow. But maybe you role play it with her, but then allow her that space to do that herself. And then that's where we as parents need to go and manage our own anxiety and really try to contain our thoughts and calm our bodies and know that, yes, this is scary, but it doesn't have to be endgame. That we've hopefully raised our children well enough with the food allergy to know how they can help to manage themselves.
Okay. Someone said that they're dealing with, just from your social work side of things, they're dealing with anxiety in their child around food allergies in general. How do they go about finding a specialist that deals with food allergies in their area? Is there something they should be looking for when they're looking for a therapist that may have experience specifically in this?
So that's a really good question, and people ask that a lot because therapists who do solely practice with clients who are food allergic is very rare. There's a select few who do that. And I think while that is helpful to have your therapist understand that aspect of food allergies, I don't feel it's essential. A good therapist is one who's empathic and who's really going to listen and understand where you're starting at and join you there. A good therapist is going to be trained in anxiety management techniques and that relational component between the parent and the child, and offer enough support to get through that aspect. I think they're going to be compassionate enough to understand that it is truly a scary thing without feeling like without you feeling minimized. So just looking for, I think, a therapist that you feel comfortable with, one who is trained in working with children, first of all. And if they are trained in working with children, most likely they're going to be trained in dealing with anxiety as well, because it's something that happens a lot in childhood.
So a question about, you're doing talked a lot about how importance of conversation and communication with folks, but for someone that's a college student that's kind of in the middle of the hookup culture.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you have those kinds of conversations, or how do you deal with food allergies around I'm using their quote, the hookup culture?
Yeah, I imagine it's sort of, these theories are very counterculture to the college culture. So it does add, food allergies in the college culture does add an added element of stress, certainly. I think that's where you have to go back to, that idea of, for you, in particular with a food allergy, knowing that there are certain things you may have to do differently. You will have to do differently in your relationships, and this is one of them. And so, going back to that, if you can't talk about it, don't be doing it, I think applies on lots of different levels there. But be true to yourself and respect yourself in that this is your safety. And, this is where a social network becomes important, because maybe your friend can have a conversation with their friends to kind of maybe break the ice a little bit on that, and just, you've got your wingman to say, hey, just so you know, she's got a food allergy, you better take care of her. So that can open the dialogue for further discussion. But again, I think using humor, but knowing that, yeah, we have to have those conversations, even though it might be counterculture to the college life. This is something that you live with.
And then a question, again, kind of related to a step further from the boyfriend piece. So there's someone that's asking a question about they had a great boyfriend that they talk a lot, they took precautions, but she still broke out in hives once when they kissed, and he feels really guilty about it. So any suggestions for kind of consoling a significant other that may have caused a few hives to appear?
Sure. Yeah, that's where that aspect of forgiveness comes in, and just letting them know it's okay. It wasn't, this is a recoverable event. But I think maybe it's also good that the boyfriend does have a little bit of feelings of guilt, because he's really going to bear that in mind the next time. And I think that will play into him being very careful going forward. But yeah, that's where forgiveness for those slip-ups, because those are going to happen. That's happened to me as well, where the hives break out and I start to get snotty and wheezy, and it's okay, sorry, you know, let's move on. But assuring him that you are okay, and that maybe having that conversation about what to do different next time to avoid that from happening, and knowing that he'll get over being upset about it, you know, feeling ashamed about it, and maybe it's a little bit good that he does have some remorse.
Okay. I'll give people one more minute while I do a wrap up, and any other questions come in, we can take them, but I believe we